Good morning, and I want to welcome you to our webinar today that's going to be on houses of worship, and we're going to be talking about the opportunities for production growth. So this is a great area, great subject, and we have a wonderful instructor today, Christine Hazard. She's Vice President of the nonprofit, and I cut out her title here, so let me just make sure. Package for USLI. She's fabulous, and you're going to really enjoy her today. My name is Nay Augustini, and I'm CEO of CID Insurance Programs. We have also with us is Michelle Belden, who's our nonprofit underwriter, and she's very good and may answer some of your questions as we go through. And then Jacob Cole is our marketing specialist who makes everything run smoothly. Before I introduce Kristen, I just want to make sure, well, you're going to handle the questions. So without further ado, Kristen, take it away.
Thank you, and thank you for that wonderful introduction. Yeah, and just so you all know that currently you're all defaulting to mute. So any questions, feel free to put into the chat function, and we can always address them midstream or at the end. But ultimately, the goal for today is, I think the most common question we are all getting, Anae, myself, Michelle, Jacob, today is, what is an area of opportunity in a little bit of a kind of bleak time? And there are, believe it or not, areas of growth worth targeting. We've heard a number of times and see how the instability of certain industry segments, such as the restaurants and manufacturing, and they're very subject to just economic conditions and what's going. But nonprofit tends to have that stability. So we'll kind of share some of those opportunities and focus mainly in on houses of worship and how they've just been a rock for the community in so many ways, but also really in the insurance industry segment. And then ultimately we'll wrap up with just giving you that tutorial of what you need to quote and how the easiest way you can get a quote. You'll find that we're really looking to provide you options throughout the whole process. So together between CID, USLI, we really truly are an effective and efficient solution. We're offering, and they have access to products that are really priced specifically in nonprofit organizations in mind, and with coverage specifically designed for nonprofits. And you'll have those options of putting together a multi-line package with up to 8 lines of coverage, just with one application and working really just with one underwriter instead of having to fill out 9 to 10 and go to 3 different underwriters and be lost in the whole process. So you, again, as I mentioned earlier, we'll say it many times, you have options. You can submit a piece of business, you can send it to Michelle. You can pick up the phone and dial that 877-969-7359 number and get in touch with an underwriter and get a quote. And then you have the opportunity for web quote as well. And I'm going to do a quick demo of that today, just in case anyone is unfamiliar. So houses of worship, just to look at that as a specific segment. A lot of times people don't think of them as not-for-profits. We consider them within that nonprofit sector, mainly because of the value and the service that they provide to the individuals within their communities. Now, there's over 350,000 houses of worship in the United States. And it's almost mind-blowing, because if I asked you what's probably more prevalent, Starbucks or churches, you're probably thinking, well, as I drive down the street, I see a million Starbucks. I mean, there's Starbucks within Starbucks, and that's crazy, right? Well, believe it or not, there's churches, and then there's churches within churches. Churches rent to other churches. So there's a significant number of houses of worship in the United States, and I guarantee you there are multiples within your community. Now, another interesting fact is that 4,000 new places of worship will open every year. And what that's a function of is many individuals, they grew up worshiping one way, and they look as they get older and they now have that luxury of choice. They say, you know what, I feel like that's old fashioned. I don't like the views anymore. I feel like, but there's some central tenets that are super important to me, and I'm going to find a group of people who feel the same way we still want to do a lot of good work within our own communities, but maybe we want to wear jeans to church or something simple like that. So they find their groups, and it might be 20 to 30 people. They might even be meeting in a high school or a pancake house every Sunday, and they're just getting together to worship. And so that's where these new ones seem to arise. They are split off. They're areas of planting where people are trying to spread the good word in different areas of the country. So, with that, we see this as a growth opportunity. And in particular, with the current, I guess, climate, if you will, these have been critical within the communities. Now, one other little interesting element, and maybe for those folks who are attending today who commonly work with houses of worship, you may already know this, but there are so many social and human service organizations that tend to be affiliated or working in conjunction with churches. And so what that ultimately means, and I would say usually with a church or a house of worship, they do have that bleeding heart and they want to offer space to these different food banks and shelters and whatnot. At the end of the day, it does become very apparent that they really should be separately insured. And so with that, you have the opportunity to not only help out the church, but then potentially help them limit their liability and cover all of the tenants that might be utilizing that space. So we just got a quick question asking kind of just on the broader scale about all nonprofits. Like things like ballet companies. It's a great question. Our nonprofit appetite just at USLI, and please keep in mind that that's all we're really talking about today. CID has access to other programs, but within the USLI appetite, we write over 500 different types of not-for-profits, if you can believe that, and specifically arts and theater groups, ballet, all of that would fit within what we're doing. So when in doubt, definitely contact CID, send it over, call that phone line, and there's a great chance that we're going to be able to help. So, the current trends is that, as I mentioned earlier, churches are essential and they are remaining open. They may be finding creative ways to provide their services, whether that's virtually. Some are doing these drive-in church operations, and they're just finding ways to creatively social distance and maybe do these things outdoors. And some are continuing to have indoor services, but hopefully we're looking that they are complying with that guidance that the CDC or your local state might be providing. And so they're still looking for insurance and they're still looking to get that coverage in place because they know they need it. And I would say another element to all of this, even before the pandemic came to play, there had been continuous concerns about abuse and molestation and theft and vandalism. And so it's something that every church needs to be aware and wants to have and should have that coverage. But we've seen some carriers who just weren't prepared to provide that, or maybe had more heavy hit. And so some are changing their approach and some are even removing from the class of business. So there is some market instability to be aware of. If you are experiencing that, please reach out to Michelle before the end of the week, and she can tell you how she can help. So there's a great segue, right? How can CID help? Well, for one, there's a stability to a great carrier in USLI that we've been able to provide solutions to houses of worship for over 30 years. And I've been there working on them for about 17 of those years. And I can tell you the general trend is really we've just looked to how do we can expand to write more. And so we're in a very good position. We feel that it is a great class of business. But CID overall has multiple markets for houses of worship, and they can handle those that are up to $10 million in total insurable value, and that's in regards to the building, is what I'm talking about there, or 100,000 square feet in size, and that's being used for the church operations. And of course, as we mentioned earlier, you have so many quote options. You can call in, you can quote online, or you can email to Michelle. So when we're talking about the sector as the USLI products built, there are so many different types of denominations and ways of worship. And so we have a very broad focus. We don't specify what kind of denomination we're trying to focus on. They can be independent. They can be part of a larger group. They can be brand new. They may not even have a building, as I mentioned, the storefront churches, as they're sometimes called. All of those fit well within what we want to write. And from a phone quote standpoint, if you've had that experience and you enjoy using phone quote, and just as a side note, there does tend to be a great user experience with the phone quote. Quotes are done probably about 5 minutes, and we see a much higher bind ratio, probably because you're able to explain them a lot better. But if you like that, your sort of confines of what you're working within are those churches that have about 30,000 square feet. Maybe they have a food bank, they could have counseling or shelter, all of that's fine. They might be offering services like Mother's Day Out. If it's more complicated, then you probably want to submit to Michelle, or take a stab at it online, and then we'll have the information already going. But it doesn't mean you can't write what's outside of this appetite. It just means it's a little more complicated and we need a little more time. So from a coverage standpoint, a lot of our churches are on a bit of a shoestring budget. So at the very basic level, we're still able to give them a very significant amount of coverage. If you just look at the general liability side of it, we first of all have no liability deductibles. We are offering a critical coverage in personal and advertising injury, which you'll see in surplus lines. Some carriers are not giving that because they see this is a higher risk class. But we've been able to do that and offer it at full limits for the past 30 years, as I've mentioned. We are offering the higher non-denominational auto. We are also including those church members automatically as additional insureds. From a property standpoint, we are able to provide that theft coverage. We do provide vandalism. And again, those coverages can all be dependent upon what protections that the building itself may have and how well updated it's been. So just keep that in mind. We can always walk you through that, when you come to a specific account. But we're looking to either offer just contents or contents plus building. Some synagogues and whatnot may have Torah coverage that they need, these fine, uniquely valued papers that we can offer a specific coverage for as well. And ultimately, crime and employee dishonesty are available. But what comes down to selling our quote? Where is it really that you look between competition and what we offer, where it's critical? First of all, the low minimum premiums. If you were looking to write just general liability only, you had a tenant-based church in California, we're probably going to be around $425. And that would be admitted. You put that on direct bill. It's a really great solution. With the pastoral professional, that is a critical coverage that we automatically include. It's important because you have church elders, leaders who are deemed able to provide that counseling service. We don't require them to be ordained necessarily because, again, we're considering so many different types of denominations. But what they could be talking about with their church members and congregants can be super sensitive. And in the event that there's an error or omission when they're providing that counseling, they want to make sure that they have that coverage in place. So we have now reduced pricing for that for $1 million limit that's built into the general liability. As I mentioned earlier, the allegations of abuse and molestation are always a concern. We know so many churches are well run, but it's just something, a dark shadow that seems to follow religious institutions. Whether, again, they're at fault or not, sometimes it's just the allegation that can be the problem. And so with that, we're able, first of all, to offer a limit that's for no additional premium. That's $100, $300. So your basic level quote is going to come with $100, $300 of abuse and molestation coverage. If you have a larger church that maybe has youth programs and things of that nature, and they want to make sure they have a broader coverage, then we can go up to $1 million limits, and that's available for a flat charge. And there's limits in between available for a charge, but most commonly, folks are looking for either the sub-limit or the full limits. We also offer within our package, again, as an option, directors and officers liability. So if they do have a board in place, this will protect them for the decisions they're making with any sort of donation or tithing that's given to the church. We also offer what's called our lifetime occurrence reporting provision. And this is available really for any not-for-profit. What it provides is a lifetime tail for the individual director or officer. so that they know and they can rest assured that they'll always have coverage for the decisions they made in the event a future board just goes bare and chooses to cancel or non-renew coverage. So that's no additional premium automatically provided for them. With also that directors and officers comes EPL, and with EPL will also come our third-party discrimination and harassment coverage. And again, if you're thinking of this religious institution sort of world, it's a critical coverage. Churches are legally allowed to discriminate because, obviously they're run based on these whatever principles that they, deem are critical. So just to give an example, there's a chance that if maybe their secretary, unfortunately gets pregnant out of wedlock, a more conservative church is not going to approve of that, and they may work to remove her from that service or remove her from the public eye in a sense. That person would have every right to bring an employment claim against the church. This would provide them that defense. And of course, it's up to the court to determine whether or not they had that right to discriminate, but they're going to need to pay for a defense. They're going to need to hire an attorney. So why not have your insurance policy provide that service? So there's also, as I mentioned earlier, some opportunities to write additional business alongside of the church business you may write today. Many of these have great relationships with nonprofits in their communities who are providing these critical services to potentially their congregants or just members in the community. And many of them even offer to work together, volunteer, and there's some kind of cross of operations. And so we're able to, if it's a part of the church's operation, cover it. We're also able to help and provide a solution for these individual organizations if they're separate from the church. So things like food banks and soup kitchens, which are so critical today. You probably see them on the news within your own community with lines of cars because people need this support. So we're definitely able to provide a very effective and inexpensively priced product for those organizations. It could be a thrift store. It could be counseling. We actually see a great deal of Alcoholics Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous, all utilizing the space of churches. They may also then go and have other meetings at the library or a community center. So, you think about that, they're going to need a broad coverage that's going to follow them around. And we can provide that at a very inexpensive point. Caregivers and senior outreach and youth outreach all are examples of these social service organizations that I'll admit we've probably seen most of that growth since March, just because they are so critical within the community. And, afterwards, if you want to, chat more, we can work through Michelle to get you some ideas and resources to build out that book. But they're great ways to establish new contacts and find that ultimately these organizations are going to refer others. So it's a nice way to kind of expand your footprint. Other ways to find new business opportunities, if you're looking just at the church world, as it were, you can use resources like Church Finder. There are associations built for churches where they all come together and talk about the common issues they're all facing. One example of that is the Church Network, the NACBA, but there are plenty of other on a local and state level that are, potentially where churches are meeting of different sort of denominations or just size. So, church planting organizations exist. There's a lot that's out there for you to build a network. You can, again, if you write a few churches, ask for those referrals, talk about the folks that are using their church facilities, see who's utilizing their space for event liability. And of course, as we mentioned earlier, D&O is always an opportunity that we can add. And so those board members consider that if they're probably serving on their church board, they're very likely serving on other community organizations as well, giving their time. So it's just a nice conversation to strike up and learn more about. So I want to take a moment now, change gears a little bit, and talk about some of the services that churches and other nonprofits may need today. We at USLI will offer through CID access to our Business Resource Center, and it's at bizresourcecenter.com. You can, after this webinar, go check it out for yourself. There's no password required. But you can go there and see there are so many services that are available to USLI policyholders. And it doesn't matter the size or the number of coverages that are available in the policy, they can get access to free human resources consultants. I mean, think about how much employment law has changed. They can answer all of those questions. If they need to do screenings, whether that's background checks on people who are working within their church, they can utilize that at a discounted basis. And even if they're thinking ahead and they want to address cyber risks, there's a whole tutorials on best ways to do that. We got another great question asking about, with COVID-19 regulations in place, do commercial general liability policies cover liability for contracted diseases of church members? You know, it's a great question. It's been coming up pretty regularly. I know many carriers are making the move to kind of tighten up language. And you will see more regularly whether it's tucked within a pollution exclusion or there's a specific communicable disease exclusion. But I think most policies are moving in the direction of excluding that exposure. And so, you know, on the one side, I would argue it's really, really difficult that to prove that a church is where somebody contracted the disease. But ultimately, you know, I think more carriers are going to move into the direction of making it something that's essentially uninsurable, because it is really hard to keep that from happening. But I would say also probably, I know we do have that communicable disease exclusion. Many carriers have already had that just because of the things like, you know, drinking of communal wine and things like that have kind of created that other exposures with regards to disease transfer. But thank you for great questions. Our Business Resource Center, to go on, also gives access to guidelines for how churches and other community organizations can safely reopen, checklists, tutorials, and videos to really help them find the right ways. We also offer a service to provide plastic partitions, signage to show what 6 feet away looks like. All of that's available on a discounted basis through the Biz Resource Center. You can find access to where they might be able to find grants and financial relief, and other safety guides from Red Cross and OSHA. There's a lot there. So now, you know, obviously, if you're really looking to target this and you need a quote quickly, there's a great resource that you have through Instant Quote. You can do this over the phone. And I love that, because then you'll get to get in touch with underwriters. Myself, I'm one who handles those calls. And if you really feel though you're really familiar with this, also another great resource is quoting online. Now, with all of these options, the great thing is you do not need an application completed to get the quote. Whereas you might have that as an obstacle with some other carriers, you can get this all done just knowing what your basic rating information is. You don't need to fill out accords or all that other fun stuff. So once you dial that toll-free number, you are going to be connected with over 45 underwriters now at this point. And we're going to ask you the main questions you need to get a quote completed. If you want to, we can ask all of the questions and help fill out that application while we're taking that information from you. And that, you know, if it turns out that it's something that's outside of the appetite, we'll just transfer you back to CID, and they'll work with their stable of other carriers to find out how they can get solutions put together for you. And then I'm going to just really quickly show you what this ends up looking like. So bear with me. So here we are. I'm going to the CID website and look at these beautiful people that you get to work with. And then I'm looking under what we write, and I'm going to go to nonprofit, because as I mentioned at the beginning, we kind of look at churches as nonprofits. And you'll see that there's a whole huge list of nonprofits that you can either quote over the phone or online. Churches and houses of worship are what we're talking about today. You'll get a nice little idea of what our target clients look like, the coverage that are available, and certain requirements. But we're going to click right here on web quote. And I've already put in my password, but you can see that it takes me straight to these questions. And we're really going to ask the really critical questions here. Now, In the interest of time, since I know I've already been a bit long-winded, I'm going to just provide a quote right now for GL, commercial GL. But know that you can click on all of these boxes and get a full-fledged quote. You can remove and isolate any coverage that you like. But for right now, we're just going to look at the GL. First question that's going to be asked is, have there been any losses in the past 3 years? We are absolutely able to look at that business, but from a web quote standpoint, that's going to require underwriter review. And so if you answer yes to that, it'll collect some of the information about those claims. If you don't know, then just put unknown and we can verify that at binding. But if you know it's been loss-free, go ahead and mark that it's loss-free. Then we're going to ask for the name. Since I'm practicing here, I'm just going to call it Test Church. And if you want to play around with it, I recommend you do the same. Just call it Test. That way we don't try to solicit and bind it. But anyhow, it's going to ask about how many years have they been at this location. That's going to, if it's over 3 years, it's going to give them an opportunity at potential credits. So if you know it, that's always great to enter in. The next question is asking about if USLI, United States Liability Company, is the expiring carrier. Why we ask that is that this is not meant for business that's really a renewal. It's really meant for new opportunities. So if it is a renewal, then you'll just need to work through Michelle on all of that. But if let's just say it's not, it's a new piece of business. Here's our description of operations. I recommend you be as thorough as possible. You don't need to write a novel, but we'll put church with monthly Mother's Day Out program, and that's just where they kind of provide like a youth programming so the moms can go keep their sanity and maybe get coffee or drinks or something together. And then you just put in what you know, right? We need a location address. This will not restrict coverage, but it just tells us generally where they're operating. Okay, let's see if I can just go and put in, it's hard to type when people are watching. Get a zip code here for you, okay. And so that's a nice thing is if you know zip code, it's going to pre-fill the city. If you know the city, it'll pre-fill the zip code. And if you know this is the mailing address, you can just click that that's the mailing address as well. This will be your limit options, and you can choose and select what you need. We'll put in the square footage of this one. You have that option to deselect pest or professional, but it already is going to automatically provide that. And if you have additional exposures, perhaps like apartments and whatnot, you can put yes, and it's going to collect that information. Now, if I were to hit continue at this point and not fill these out, you're going to get like a little notice at the top of your screen that's going to be in all red, and it won't let you move forward. That's just telling you didn't answer all of the questions. But I'm going to say no, there's no parsonage, there's no housing for your leaders there, and all of that. So we go through, and pretty much at this point, we have enough to generate a quote. And you can see we have a quote. And if you look at, oops, I went to the application. Let's see. It's going to take a moment to generate there. But let's see if it'll let me go back. Let's see. I may have lost at this point, but oh, there it was. So here we go. If we go to printable version of the quote, you'll see it's going to look exactly like if you view it, it's going to look exactly like what you would get if you had just submitted a paper application. And so that's the kind of the welcome letter. And then here's all of your terms. You got this bind box, so if you're ready to bind, you can add whatever options you need. You can check off whatever payment options you need, and you'll see your pricing. You got $444 for the premium that's due. You have an admitted quote. So, and then there it's talking about that business resource center again. And then right now, I'll show you, there's a lot that shows here that you need prior to bind. All that you need to do is fill out that pre-filled application, which will also come along in this quote right back here. It's going to be the last thing that attaches. So you can see it's going to be fill out with what we already know, and everything else you can just tick off and then get your applicant to sign. So ultimately, it's pretty easy to go ahead and get that done. So just to finish up, as I mentioned, you're going to look for those things for your prior to binds. After the call, you're going to receive that copy right away. CID will also get that copy. And then if you're ready to bind, just send that in to Michelle and get that done. So I want to thank everyone for joining us today. I'm going to turn it back over to Ane and see if we have any questions.
Thank you so much, Kristen. Great information. I hope everyone got value from it. If there are any additional questions, please type them in right now. Even if we sign off, Jacob will make sure that your questions get answered. But of course, we're ready for you to start doing business with us, churches, houses of worship, and any of your nonprofits. You want to contact Michelle. You saw where our applications are on the website, and so we really, Michelle's ready to take care of all your nonprofit needs. So please contact her if you have any additional questions after we sign off. And then I want to thank you for your business, for those that have been doing business with us, and for those of you that are just seeing us for the first time, have not done business with us. We encourage you to submit applications to us and see how we take care of you. We're fast and efficient, and we answer the phone and answer our emails. So we look forward to doing business with you. All right, thanks for joining us.